so much, Ayanda. That's exactly right. I think what's so interesting is we're trying to bring attention to the other pandemic. The world is focused on the COVID pandemic, of course, which makes a lot of sense. But it's been a few decades where we've really been trying to bring attention and bring progress to the AIDS pandemic. And we feel that most intensely in East and Southern Africa. There have been incredible lessons from the HIV/AIDS response, particularly in this region, that I think have informed the COVID response as well. And those are important lessons to take. We have made a lot of progress, but as you say, we're not going to reach our targets and we're not going to end AIDS in children unless we accelerate.
Right. And what's also quite disheartening, I guess, is that children have always lagged behind insofar as their ability to receive treatments, even when key therapeutics were being rolled out. What are the setbacks and why is it so difficult to get over them?
In the early days, it was really looking to science and looking for the scientific breakthroughs so we could have the right treatment for pregnant women to prevent transmission to their children. And then it was about having the pediatric formulations for children living with HIV/AIDS. We've made so much progress. We can prevent transmission of HIV from pregnant women living with HIV to their newborns. We also have really good pediatric treatment for children. So now it's really about finding them and linking them to the services and care that they need. You mentioned this treatment gap, and I think even though we have made progress, what's really important to recognize is we're not going to reach epidemic control, we're not going to end AIDS unless we reach all children and adolescents everywhere. So in South Africa, for example, almost 75% of people living with HIV are on antiretroviral treatment. That's adults. But among children, it's not even 50%. So we're not getting to the children, we're not getting them on treatment, and importantly, keeping them on treatment, because what's important when you start antiretroviral treatment is to continue every day so that you suppress the virus. And that's really where we need to focus.
Yeah. Also quite sobering to realize that, according to some of the statistics that have been put together, adolescent girls 6 times more likely to contract HIV than their male counterparts, in other words, than boys. Another stark reminder that inequalities are a huge factor in our ability to fight this pandemic.
Absolutely. We know a lot of the reasons and the way HIV transmission happens because of the work of outfits in South Africa, in Durban, Caprisa, and at universities. And it's really about adolescent girls and young women. Their sexual partners are older men, 8 to 10 years older than them, and we have this transmission cycle. So we understand better about what's happening, but there are so many other, in the UN, what we call structural drivers: gender inequality, adolescent girls dropping out of school, getting pregnant, not having the ability and feeling that they can ask their partner to use a condom. I think it's a whole range of issues. Those are the difficult issues. There's no magic bullet. We are making advances in science around some of the biomedical responses, PrEP, taking a pill every day that would prevent HIV infection when you're HIV negative. So there are advances, but it's some of the broader societal issues. During COVID, we talked so much about gender-based violence and the increases we saw. These are all the things that also fuel the AIDS epidemic, and we need to keep our eye on those issues and to respond to them.
Yeah. Help us place this development. I mean, what I've also learned through this report is that we have actually managed to miss every single one of the 2020 Super Fast Track targets that was set by the UN high-level meeting on ending AIDS. One, help us understand what those targets are and what to make of the fact that we've missed every single one of them.
So let me put it maybe in a bit of context, which is when member states and when the UN gathers to look at HIV/AIDS and set targets, those discussions are usually quite ambitious, which is fantastic. We talk about ending AIDS by 2030. We try to find the mix between being ambitious and being realistic. What's really achievable? What also do we need in terms of resources to reach those targets? So those targets are set with often, kind of a horizon of 5, 10, 20 years to really drive us to try to reach them. Then you have the reality and the reality check of having to have the programs and find people living with HIV, get them on treatment, make sure they stay on treatment. That no one could have predicted 2 years ago what the COVID pandemic would do to, all health responses. We had very severe lockdown in Lesotho, as we did in South Africa. Access to, just getting to the clinic, access to essential health services. We saw a lot of declines. We saw almost a 50% decline in Lesotho in the uptake of testing for HIV. We saw pretty dramatic declines, over 70%, in men coming for medical male circumcision. And that's because everything shut down and because people were scared and didn't even want to go to a health clinic for fear of the risk of COVID. We are trying to build back and find people and have those links in community and make sure they can continue their treatment, make sure they have key messages and the information. But, there are obstacles in the way to reaching those targets. I think that what we are saying in UNICEF is that we can get back on track if we focus the resources on where the gaps are, and in this case, we're identifying the gaps in terms of reaching children and adolescents, not only those living with HIV, but also those, as you say, who are at risk of HIV, and giving them the kind of support and programs that they need so they can stay HIV-free and they can also access treatment.
We've spoken a lot about the strides made in the world of science. There's a great interest in vaccinations across the board for all manner of ailments. In fact, there was a moment, if memory serves me well, where it almost felt like we were close to getting an HIV vaccine. Is that something that you reckon can still be discovered, formulated within our lifetime?
I hope so. We all hope so. Those working in the HIV field for the last few decades really do hope so. It is interesting to note that the acceleration and how quickly we discovered a vaccine for COVID, a lot of that science was built on years and decades of work by African scientists who've been working and looking for an HIV vaccine and what they have been able to do. So, all of these, even though we don't have the vaccine for HIV yet, all of that really important scientific effort is not for naught. Hopefully we will get there, but it's also informing other breakthroughs like the COVID vaccine, which I think is quite amazing.